You're really right to call that out. And nobody's ever actually asked me about this before. If they go into the movies and they have an idea of what a movie is and they get something different than that, they reject the movie.
So I recently had the privilege of speaking with writer and director Brock Heasley. He premiered his first feature film last year called The Shift. It's a sci-fi thriller with Christian themes, and it was released by Angel Studios to tremendous success. We talked a lot about the struggles of making the film and what it represents as a new direction for the faith-based genre. So here is my conversation with Brock Heasley. How are you, sir?
I am doing real good, Dylan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a Tuesday morning over here, so kind of getting my bearings in order. But it's great, always great to speak to fellow filmmakers on a Tuesday. So, so true story, just very quick. Actually, when me and my wife went to go see The Shift, we saw it opening weekend,
Oh,
and
cool.
we went and saw it on her birthday. As a matter of fact, it wasn't necessarily her birthday wish. It was like we're gonna go see a movie, and I was like, we're gonna see The Shift. So,
And
so
she's
she
like,
went
"What
and
is this movie?" And you're like, "Let me not tell you about it because this needs to be a happy birthday." So how did that go down? Like, what did you say to her to convince her to see this movie on her birthday?
Well, she doesn't like to pick the movies we see, and she doesn't follow movies as much as I do. So she was like, "Yeah, sure, let's
Right.
go see it." So yeah, she didn't know much about it going into it. And as we were like 20 minutes into the movie, Sean Astin shows up on screen, and
Right.
she turns to me in the theater and goes like, "Sean Astin's in this?" And she's like the biggest Lord of the Rings fan. And I think from then
Oh,
on, she was like,
awesome.
I'm really into the movie. And then it was like, she just couldn't believe it. She was like I just got really into it at that point, type of thing. So it was
Oh,
just a
that's
funny
great.
moment. But no, we really did enjoy the movie. It was like, I could just tell it was such a huge accomplishment on your end. So congratulations on the
Well,
film.
thank you.
It's very, very
Thank
well
you.
done. And I believe it's available on streaming right now, if I'm not mistaken. So everybody
Yeah,
can go check it out. Where is it
it's
available?
available pretty much everywhere for rental or purchase at the moment.
Mm.
So you're talking Amazon, Apple, YouTube, all the different places. If you go to angel.com/the shift, there's actually like links to all of the different places you can watch, plus Blu-ray and DVD.
Now, you shared the experience of making the film and like dozens of interviews and the journey it took to get here. So instead of discussing more of the same, I wanted to speak
Mhm.
with you more about how you've incorporated faith into your filmmaking and your stories. I
Mhm.
first caught the short film you made in 2017 that The Shift is based on, and I was really impressed by the depth of the story that you had just in that short film. And up to that point in your career, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you basically had never made a film and you had like
That is correct.
no money to shoot this thing. So
Also correct.
how confident were you that that short film concept was going to work, or did you have some doubts? I mean, making a sci-fi thriller around a Christian talking to the devil seems like a difficult
Right.
story to pull off, especially for a debut film.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I had the great fortune of when I made that short film that I had zero aspirations for it. It
Mm,
really was a case of me looking around at who I knew and saying to myself, "Huh, I know some actors, I know some people who know how to hold a camera.
mm,
I bet if I bet I could get these people together and I could try to make something."
mhm,
I had just recently entered the film industry, and so to me there was a great curiosity of like, what can I do within this industry? I'd always been a fan of movies, and I was kind of fashioning myself as a writer, and I really had this curiosity about whether or not I could make a movie, and by make I mean direct and write and produce one. And in doing that, I pulled this short story I had written out of mothballs about this guy who gets into a car accident. He wakes up, he's confronted
mm,
by the devil, and the devil has a job offer, and the multiverse is kind of worked in there. It was this crazy thing that I had written years ago. It wasn't written very well. It was right when I was kind of dipping my toe into writing. And yeah, and so I fashioned that into a script over the course of just 3 weekends
mm,
in late 2015. We shot the film. Took me about a year of post production because again, I couldn't pay anybody. I was
mm,
actually really, I was at my absolute poorest at the time. I
mm,
really, really had no money. I had been out of work for over a year at that point, and just wasn't making anything. So everything was volunteer. Everything took forever because of that. I'm really just begging and pleading for people to do special effects or to do music or whatever. But
Mhm.
eventually it got done. And then when it was done, it was, I thought it was great. I thought it was beautiful, and I was really proud and happy with it. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that no one would ever really want to see it because it was it was taking two genres that aren't ever put together.
Mhm.
And everybody who came to that first screening was very complimentary. Like they were
Mhm.
very excited about it. They're like, "Wow, this is really powerful." And this is, I guess the easiest way to put it, it was kind of more than the sum of the parts. That's really what it felt like. And
Mhm.
so I was really emboldened by that, but also never thinking, "Oh, this is something that can turn into a feature film." Because everybody that night also said, "Yeah, who's gonna watch this?" Like the faith films. I mean, we're talking 2015. Think about the faith films that had come out in that time.
Mhm.
2016 actually was when the film was completed. Uh, it didn't fit. And then you think about mainstream, definitely doesn't fit there.
Mhm.
And so I was really consciously trying to do something different. Now I'll confess, I had seen maybe two faith films in my
Mhm.
life up to that point. I mean, what you would consider as part of like the faith-based genre. I had seen a lot of trailers, and I
Mhm.
knew those were not movies I wanted to watch. So I was very much in the creation of the short film, kind of reacting to my perception of what
Mm.
faith-based films are, as being kind of cheesy and kind of not very deep. And
Mhm.
I didn't know if that was fair or not. That was just my impression. But also just being somebody who loves science fiction, I don't know, I see science fiction as a vehicle to talk about anything. So it was like, well, I can make this film and it'll be just for me. That's really
Mhm.
what it was. It was for me to see if I could do it, to tell a story that meant something to me. And then obviously it turned out to be a lot more.
Yeah, and it really was an impressive first debut film that you've done, because that's really remarkable. I mean, I've been making movies since I was a little kid, or movies, quote unquote. But it was more so like, just like amateur hour left and right. I can't even watch those things without like cringing myself. But you watch this film and you're like, wow, this seems competently made. Obviously, like you can tell production value, like, okay, they're working with what they have. I mean, every short film has that. My films have
Right.
that. But at the same time, you're like, for a first-time filmmaker, that's actually really, really, really good. And yeah, the infusion with the faith-based concept with sci-fi is really fascinating to me, because I've seen other films, you mentioned kind of the mainstream faith-based genre. And admittedly, I haven't seen too many of them myself because I'm just honestly not that interested in them. And
Right.
I say that as a Christian. So it's something where I go like, no, no knocking against them. I'm glad people like them and I'm glad they exist. I'm glad they're there.
Absolutely.
But once you incorporated those two genres, I was like, this is kind of like what I want to see in faith-based films. Is the joke I always made is that like I want somewhere between God's Not Dead and Braveheart. Somewhere in between there. Like I don't
Right.
I don't
That
necessarily
sweet spot between God's Not Dead and Braveheart that we all know exists.
yeah.
But how do you define that?
I know. I was like, where is that balance? There's like I can appreciate both films. I think they're both, they are what they are, but it's like I
Right.
just want like maybe not so intense on either spectrum of that. So
Right.
you make the short film, you submit it to Angel Studios, they want to
Mhm.
turn it into a feature. Were there conversations early on with them about how to represent the religious themes that are in the film? Because Angel Studios seems to be making a lot of faith-based content that is like different from the traditional wholesome content we're used to with faith-based
Mhm.
films. So, was there an understanding of how much faith should be conveyed in this film, or did they give you like complete freedom to tell the story how you want? Because this was all kind of right when The Chosen hadn't really taken off yet. They weren't really a
Right.
named studio at that point. So, was there like, creative freedom, do what you want, we'll support you, or was it like we have a certain, you know, for lack of a better word, quota that we're trying to meet with infusing the faith-based element into our films?
Right, right. So this is one of the things that a lot of people make incorrect assumptions about as far as how Angel Studios works.
Hmm.
They are not a faith-based studio in that
Hmm.
sense. They don't mandate that there's an element of faith.
Hmm.
That is obviously, having made their name on The Chosen, that's what people think of first.
Mm,
So there was never any discussion with me about, hey, let's make sure that we've got this element in there, or that it has faith. Faith was incidental to
mm,
what I was doing as far as they were concerned. There was not one discussion about it, about how that would be represented within the narrative. What
mhm,
Angel is really doing is they're trying to promote stories that amplify light, and that
mhm,
could be, obviously, faith promotes light. Faith is about the light of God, and so
mm,
it's natural for faith type films to fall into that. But it's not the only thing they've put out, and it's not the only thing that they will put out.
mm,
Now, one of the things, of course, with Angel is that it is not the guys at the head of the studio that are making all the decisions.
mhm,
There's also the Angel Guild, which is a group of, I think the last count was about 240,000 people who subscribe for a monthly fee to be able to watch all of Angel's content, and also to be able to review
mhm,
new projects as they're coming in and to offer their feedback. Now, the shift didn't go through that process because we did kind of come alongside The Chosen, even though The Chosen, knocked out 3 seasons before
mhm,
we ended up getting the film released.
mhm,
But we very much were kind of coming up at the same time, and that was before the existence of the guild. And so the guild at that point was really just the people in charge of the studio.
mhm,
And but once the film was ready to come out, that is when we had to go to the guild.
mhm,
And that was the first time that we did. And so we did these test screenings and we invited guild members to those, and they would give us feedback. And the film was shaped accordingly from there.
mhm,
And it was very difficult, and there were decisions that were made that were very painful when it came to editing the film.
mhm,
In the end, we ended up with a film that I'm extremely proud of,
mhm,
and that I think strikes a really great balance. I think there's still another cut out there that I would love to present to the world, but I'm really proud of the one that we did present, because I do think ultimately we struck a pretty good balance. We didn't make everybody happy. That's impossible.
mhm.
But I think yeah, I think the shift is doing enough new things and enough challenging things that we hit a lot of the original goals.
Yeah, and it's interesting you point out that Angel Studios in particular, they're not necessarily a faith-based, studio. They're,
Mhm.
known for The Chosen, which is obviously very faith-based content. But
Right.
and you kind of already were speaking about questions I was going to ask you later, which is the idea of like that balancing act, like how much faith needs to be incorporated into a film in order for it to be considered faith-based. There has been other films that have done this in the past, but they're really, really rare, especially from Hollywood. Like you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily see this. I always, say that any movie that Mel Gibson's made, I think is like a really fantastic example of like a really bold faith-based film. But
Mhm.
again, his films are really intense and they're like, man, it's violence and just
Yeah.
really, really hard to watch sometimes. And I think the faith-based audience is like, we appreciate the message, but the content is like, man, this is really hard. But that balancing act you're talking about, that's the really tricky part is like, how
Yeah.
much do we want to dabble in that? And then our audience is used to that yet? Or have they found their footing?
Mhm.
And it's really, really interesting, kind of this new world. And that's similar to the films I want to make. And I'm glad that you're, making them too and kind of set the bar for me already. So now I got to match those for my next films.
Well, yeah, it is tricky, and you're right to cite Mel Gibson, who is a devoted man of faith,
Mhm,
and somebody who's very honest about his
mhm,
his particular brand of Christianity, and
mhm,
about his influences. And then he makes these films that you're, like you say, they're very violent. I remember the one that came out, I think it was last year, year before, Father Stew,
mhm,
which was a great movie,
mhm,
but was very R-rated. It
mhm,
was a Mark Wahlberg vehicle, but Gibson played a supporting role,
mhm,
and the language kept people away,
mhm,
and to the point where they ended up re-releasing it as a PG-13, but by that
mhm.
point, people had kind of moved on, and so it didn't
Right.
it didn't do too well. Which is too bad, because it's a really great movie. I ended up catching up with it on VidAngel, which, for those
Mhm,
of you that aren't familiar, is a service that will edit content, take out harsh language and things like that, which
Hmm.
is not something I enjoy. I don't enjoy harsh language. Do not enjoy the F bomb. It really, really bothers me. And
Yeah,
so
same
other
here.
people doesn't bother them, and that's
Hmm.
fine. But it bothers me, and so
Hmm.
I will remove that from things that I watch, and it'll prevent me from watching other things. So I was able to catch Father Stew by through VidAngel, and was able to watch that version that way.
Hmm.
Um, and in fact, you won't find that language in my movies because of that.
Hmm.
But it is the audience that was really excited, that would be excited about a movie like Father Stew,
Hmm.
they're not going to turn up for it with the F bombs. It's just like
Hmm.
that's one of those lines. And it's hard to know where those lines are, but that's definitely one of them where if you
Hmm.
do too much of that, you're going to drive them away. If they see an R on there, unless it's the Passion of the Christ, which, everybody knew why that was rated R. It wasn't going to be
Right.
because it was a Tarantino film. It wasn't going to
Hmm.
be F bombs and sex and stuff. They knew
Right.
they knew why that was rated R. And so,
Hmm.
they essentially made an exception for that movie.
Hmm.
But other than the suffering of Christ, I don't know that there's an acceptable reason for an R rating. If you're
Hmm.
talking about the faith audience, I don't know that there's anything that they're going to accept that's going to make that R rating okay.
Right.
And I think they've proven that by the types of films they'll support.
Right. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. I mean, I actually haven't seen Father Stew yet, but I remember hearing about all the controversy about the language. But
Hmm.
I'm with you. The two things that I won't ever do in my films is language and any type of sexual content or nudity. Like it's a
Okay.
hard no for me. Like I just immediately pass.
Same.
I don't even like it when it's in other movies. I will literally just not watch. Like me and my wife, we thought maybe we'd give The Sopranos a chance, but like two episodes
Uh-huh.
in, we're just like, nah, we're good.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to
Yeah.
watch this. I like bold and edgy shows and content that
Hmm.
has the mainstream effect. I like a good production quality. I like a good script like anybody else. And I got to imagine that people of faith, particularly Christians, they like the same Hollywood movies that we all like. They like, mainstream stories and they like to be entertained. They like the big production value. They're
Right.
just, obviously in the political world, things are kind of moving further and further away from the church and from Christian values. And I think audiences are just getting so sick and tired of things that go against Christian values. It's not that they
Hmm.
necessarily disagree with the content per se, even though there is a huge chunk of the faith-based audience that they don't want any of that stuff. They just want it to be
Right.
wholesome, family-friendly content. But I
Right.
think most Christians, they're okay watching something that's a little more intense, a little more edgy
Hmm.
and bold. They just don't want it to be representing something that's evil or to have
Right.
a message that doesn't stay true to the word of God. They want that infusion, not in a preachy sense, but like I just want those two things. And I feel like The Shift was a good infusion of those two things. And I was actually kind of surprised, like, because I was imagining that going into it, I had heard in the promotional material that this was alluding to the book of Job. And
Hmm.
after watching the short film, I hadn't really gotten that point yet because the short film kind of like has one particular scene that it's really
Right.
focused on and like kind of like it stops right there.
The
But
short film has
then,
nothing to do with Job. You're
right,
100% correct. That was
right.
never the intent, nor is it represented in that short film.
Right. So I kind of like going in, they were like, yeah, it's the story of the book of Job and or like alluding to that. And I was like, really? And I was like, I'll see if I can pick that up. But you actually made some creative decisions that it was very overt in that message. And like you said,
Right.
it was that balancing act. And you kind of talked about it briefly where you were saying like, I'm sure in the writing process, you were trying to establish, how much of this do I want to put on the audience
Hmm.
versus have them interpret it in their own ways. Because that's always the
Yes.
risk is that if you don't put it in there, then it's like people can interpret it however you want. But it seems like you made the decision to be like, no, I'm going to make sure the audience gets this message. And
Yeah.
was there like a distinct calling? Did you have any kind of inclination of like, that is definitely the right approach to this? Or was it kind of a risk for you? Like, I don't know, like a lot of struggle
Right.
deciding that.
You're really right to call that out. And nobody's ever actually asked me about this before. And I think
Mhm.
it's really demonstrative of exactly the issue we're talking about. And like, what is the balance? How far can you push?
Mhm.
If you're trying to court the faith audience, how far can you push them before
Mhm.
you've pushed them too far? And they're going to be like, I don't even know what this is. I don't want anything to do with it.
Mhm.
Um, and when I was crafting the script for the shift, I, when I the kind of mirroring the story of Job was kind of the thing that cracked the whole story open for me, because I
Mhm.
was I was really challenged with how do I take this short film and how do I make it into a feature film. And there's two ways to do that. Either you take the story as it is in the short film and you just make it longer, you
Mhm.
expand it out, but it basically is the same story, which I've seen that approach. Or you use that short film as a jumping off point for a larger story. And to go further with it, I thought, well, this will be really interesting. What happens if the story just keeps going? And then I happened upon this idea of Job. Like, oh, Job is a really interesting story that nobody's really done anything with in the
Mhm.
film space. I think I can use this as kind of a superstructure. Um, so
Mhm.
I thought, okay, I've got this guy. I can make him into that, and then I can put him through hell, and we can deal with all of these questions. Then at the end, because I've already got this multiverse concept built in, I can take the ending of Job, which is really challenging and is really difficult for people to swallow, but I can put this into a multiverse context. It fits very nicely into that, and that was kind of the spine for me, to really take Job and put it into this crazy sci-fi context, and that there's my story.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's two ways to do that. Either you just do that, and anybody who's ever read Job should see it very clearly, or you lose a lot of the audience and you never call it out.
Mhm.
And so I realized that I had to call it out. I made the decision to call it out within the body of the film that this is Job,
Mhm.
because I wanted to make a film that had a broad appeal. There's the
Mhm.
A24 version of The Shift, where we don't call any of these things out. And
Right.
we just let people decide what they are. We let them figure out what is, to me, very, very obvious, that this guy is a Job like figure.
Mhm.
So obvious.
Mhm.
Um, or we take a moment in the film where we throw people a bone and we say, you know what, this is the parallel. This is what's going on. Now
Mhm.
we do it naturally and organically within the film. It is called out. Um, and I think we found a pretty elegant and organic way to call that out. But there was a huge temptation for me to not do that at all. And there's
Mhm.
and there's an artistic side of me that really wanted to go in that direction. I
Mhm.
really, really did not want to call out Job. There's a
Mhm.
strong part of me that didn't want to do that.
Right.
My instincts ended up being correct. There are still people who watch the film and come away saying, I don't see how this has anything to do with Job. There are still people who feel that way. How they get there, I have
Yeah.
absolutely no idea. To me, I'm practically like taking your face and rubbing it in Job, like literally almost get your face in the Bible and putting the pages, and it's all the print is like, absorbing onto your face like silly putty or something.
Yeah.
Um, but no, it turns out there are still people who watch the film and they're like, I don't get it.
Well,
I don't see it.
well,
Um, so in the end, I'm really glad that I didn't go the A24 way and that I
yeah.
called these things out in the body of the film, because that means that there's a lot more people who can shout those people down and say, you're
Mhm.
crazy. Like,
Yeah.
this is what the film is.
Right.
Um, and because look, everybody comes to a movie with a different level of experience. And that has been one of the
Mhm.
huge learning experiences for me with this film, is that um, even as much as I called out Job, there are other things that I did not make explicit in the film. And
Mhm.
there are, and the film is one of those that really rewards multiple viewings, but
Mhm.
you have to
Yeah.
want to watch it more than once in the first place. And there's some people who watch The Shift and they're like, I don't understand enough of this for me to get this. And so I
Mhm.
don't want to watch it again to uncover more. There are people
Right.
who have that experience with The Shift, and
Mhm.
that's fair.
Mhm.
I think the next one that I'm doing right now, I'm very consciously, I even call it the anti shift.
Mhm.
It's linear, it's straightforward, it has a clear theme that
Mhm.
you understand and get. I'm not trying to rewrite the rules of the universe, like
Mhm.
it's very much a reaction to the
Mhm.
shift in a lot of ways. But I'm very proud of the shift. I'm very proud that we made something that is challenging in that way. And yeah, not everybody gets it.
Mhm.
Thankfully, enough people do. And that's the challenge of bringing the film into the theatrical space, is that you can't just be like, no, this is my vision. And if people don't get it, then screw them. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. And you know
Right.
what? They can either get it or not. I'm an artist,
Yeah.
like that's
Mhm.
not going to serve, the millions of dollars that have been invested into the
Right.
film, and the
Mhm.
studio that is sacrificed and done everything they can to bring it into
Mhm.
the world. You've got to balance it. There's a
Mhm.
place for art films. I love art films,
Mhm.
But the theatrical space increasingly is not the space for those films, unless you're
Mhm.
talking about an A24 where they've built up an audience and a following that can support those films. Even
Mhm.
then, most of their films fail.
Mhm.
Um, but they're willing to take those risks. Well, Angel Studios isn't that. They're trying to serve a certain population, and they're trying to bring those films out and make them as big as they can. They succeeded wildly with Sound of Freedom, which came out just
Mhm.
before our film.
Mhm.
Our film was successful, not to the degree of Sound of Freedom, few films are, but it did reach a measure of success, and that's because um, some of that is because in the body of the film we said, yeah, you know what, guys, this is about Job. We're really
Mhm.
inspired by Job here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you kind of tapped into that audience, reaching out to the traditional faith-based audience and said, like, what if we did something that was faith-based, but not what you're used to? And I think
Hmm.
you got some of those people to kind of come on board. And that's kind of like what I'm trying to build on my end is, trying to focus on films like The Shift or films that, kind of like what Angel Studio is building. Daily Wire is kind of doing stuff with, their films, trying to infuse that kind of Christian religious element into content that everybody likes and everybody kind
Right.
of can relate to on a certain level. But it's really tricky because, again, we're dealing with almost like a learning curve because people are just so used to content being a certain way, or at least faith-based content being a certain way.
Hmm.
So you have to kind of get over that hump a little bit. So that is a challenge, but it speaks to the film and like kind of taking that risk. I still just can't get
Right.
over that people did not know that was about Job. Like when you say like it's apparent, like we're not exaggerating. Like that film is blatantly about Job, like in a
Right.
very blatant and an overt way. Like there's title cards about it. There's a scene where Kevin actually talks about Job. Like I don't know
Right.
how
Right.
else
It's all there.
how you cannot have it be about Job.
But
I
yeah,
didn't.
no, there are people who don't get it. So
They must have not have read Job. I don't know. It's
I don't
something where I'm
know.
like, how did you not know? Oh, yeah, anyway.
You know what it is that there's enough things that we're doing that are different from Job. When you say
Mhm.
to somebody, "Oh, this is like Job," well, they're expecting Job. They're expecting
Okay.
exactly that. And when
Right.
you start throwing in the multiverse and you start
Yeah.
throwing in multiple versions of people,
Mhm.
and you've got, all these crazy things that I'm doing, even you've got, our Job-like character is talking directly to the
Mhm.
devil.
Right.
Our devil character. Well, Job never talked to the devil. God talked to the devil. And also God talked to Job,
Yeah.
but Kevin in the shift, he never talks to God.
Yeah.
And so people will cite things like that and they'll be like, this isn't Job. But it's like, okay, first of all,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that literal to be inspired by
Yeah.
to
It's
be
not a
inspired
direct
by Job.
adaptation. You're not adapting
Right.
Job. You're making an allegory or
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's really important for people to both know and ignore when it comes
Mhm.
to making films for this particular audience.
Mhm.
You've got to know what you're up against. You've got to know that there are people who are just going to hate on it if it's
Mhm.
not exactly what they think it's going to be. That's the
Mhm.
other thing, is that it was really difficult to sell this movie
Mhm.
because it is doing enough different things. It's doing a lot of different things that it
Mhm.
was really hard to give people the proper expectation of
Mhm.
of the experience they were going to have going into the movies. And there are
Mhm.
some people for whom, if they go into the movies and they have an idea of what a movie is and they get something different than that, they reject the movie. Regardless of
Mhm.
its quality, they reject it.
Mhm.
And we've experienced that with The Shift. And but the thing is I mean, you've seen the movie. How do you advertise that thing?
Mhm.
It's the Shift is, again, I'm really proud of it, but I
Mhm.
also recognize that it is so different from anything that's out there, that it's
Mhm.
really hard to just kind of sum up and give people an accurate expectation, and that can turn into anticipation
Mhm.
for what the movie is, without completely spoiling it top to
Mhm.
bottom.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to have brought this film into the world. I'm happy to have brought something that is challenging in that way, and I'm really, really um, uh, um, really happy with the studio and really
Mhm.
grateful for them and for the people who helped me make this movie, that they were
Mhm.
willing to do that, to take this film, which is a challenge, and put it out into the world and put it out with confidence. It's been I don't know. I think it's whether or not you like the film or you think it's of quality, I think it's necessary. I think this
Mhm.
type of film is necessary to put out there,
Mhm.
so that we can say not only to the audience but also to future filmmakers, "Hey, there's other stories that you can tell. It doesn't have to be about the come from behind football team, or the
Mhm.
atheist who has, experiences a miracle in the third act and converts. We
Mhm.
can tell other stories.
Right.
And we can challenge the audiences a little bit, and they will embrace it. It might take a little bit of time, but
Mhm.
they'll embrace it eventually if it's done well.
Yeah, and I think like we have a lot of legwork to do as far as Christian filmmakers to kind of bring that kind of new content because I've spoken to so many family members and friends about like some of the biggest mistakes I think Christians made in the last 50 to 100 years or so is they've left Hollywood. They kind of got
Mhm.
out of it. And if you watch old films back before like 1960, a lot of films were very conservative, and at least in like the traditional sense. They
Right,
were, really family oriented, promoted good values. They weren't necessarily edgy per se, but they did have like fun, entertaining content that was
right,
mainstream Hollywood. But then the church kind of got out of it. They didn't want to be involved in it anymore. But I think there's a yearning for this type of film where I want the Avengers meets Christianity. I want something that is kind of like an avatar with Christianity. I want something big and large scale that can be taken seriously as a mainstream,
mhm,
infused with God's word. And I don't
right.
necessarily want it to be a sermon. I don't want to like go in there and have them like
No,
preach to
nobody
me
wants
per se.
that.
Nobody wants
Yeah,
that whatsoever. It's just like I want it to represent those themes and ideas. And I don't want
right,
it to be filled with, as my wife always say, the smut, all the
right,
smut in this film or the
right,
show. That usually is what deters us. Because we're like, I don't want to watch this. It's just not good for my soul. It's not good for, anybody. Like it's just not helping anybody. So I think you're right that we have a lot of like work to kind of pick up, where we've kind of been lacking in this sphere. But I think that there is an audience out there for it. But as my wife has also made this point to me too, is like, it's not going to
mhm.
be the secular people that I'm going to have to convince to watch these movies. It's going to be the religious and Christians that are going to be the harder ones to sell because, like
Yeah,
you said, they have certain expectations now. They've been told like it's either a secular movie or it's Kevin Sorbo. Like
right,
it's one of the two.
right.
And I'm like, well, we can have both. I mean, couldn't we get like a movie with Kevin Sorbo in like a mainstream Hollywood movie, like kind of infuse those two ideas,
Right,
something like
right.
that. Can we do more of those? And I'm really happy that the shift kind of was that bold, like one of the first bold steps I've seen kind of go in that direction where it's like, yeah, we need more of that.
Yeah, no, I
And I'm really
appreciate
happy
that.
that you took that risk. And I think the film's great. I think it's fantastic. I really only had like two more questions for you before we kind of run out of time here. But
Let's do it.
when I look at like, the production quality of, the film, you've come a long way and
Mhm,
you've spoken to, or you've kind of alluded to the idea of like the tragedies that you've experienced in your life. You spoke about
mhm.
it in your book. Obviously in this film, very allegorical to kind of some of the tragedies you've gone in your life. I
Right.
think as Christians, we've all gone through some sort of hardship. And there's a great C.S. Lewis quote. It's one of my favorites. He says, we are not necessarily doubting that God will do his best for us, but we are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be.
Right,
So
right,
it's that idea of like, I don't doubt that God will be faithful. It's just how much more do I have to suffer before that happens? And I
right.
think that's what deters us a lot in our faith. But when you see what Job went through, when you see what Kevin goes through in the film, you ask yourself, you have this self-reflection of, can I confidently say I could withstand that, amount of suffering? And I can't confidently say I could, I mean, I want to be humble about it and say like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's like, I don't know. If you don't know the outcome, you're not always 100% sure. You start to
Right.
doubt yourself. But even though you have that faith that it will, it's hard to get through that. But given that you've kind of gone through some of these hardships in your life, like after
Mhm.
having made this film, has it helped you kind of get through new hardships easier? Does it make it seem like it's, having gone through this new experience, like you now have a new outlook on when new hardships do arise, and they always do
Yeah,
arise? Does it kind
they
of
do.
seem like it's now like, okay, I can handle this a little bit better than I did before, or is it just as hard every time, every time you get something thrown at you?
Well, I think the answer is both.
Mm,
I think one of the great advantages to maturing in faith
mm,
and to growing older is that you do have kind of this bank of experiences you can draw upon. You can look back and you can say, okay, well, I may be having a hard time right now, but I remember passing through this hard time and I stayed faithful and it turned out all right. And that's helpful. It's very helpful to have those experiences.
Mhm.
But I also believe that um, as long as we're here on this earth, um, one of the chief responsibilities we have is to learn and to grow.
Mhm.
Um, I really think that's the big point of it all. That that there is learning and growth that can only happen here.
Mhm.
Um, we are all headed for a better place,
Mhm.
but that better place is different, and there is a greater purpose to our experiences here, and I believe serve us in the eternities. And so I think the reality of that is that in order to learn and grow, we're going to have to be hit with new experiences. That
Mhm.
means that whatever I may have, or you or anybody else has suffered previously, we can count on new sufferings ahead, and those new sufferings will challenge us in different ways. They may be
Mhm.
worse. They may not be as worse. I kind of anticipate them being worse. That's kind of my default expectation,
Mhm.
because I do think that learning and growth comes from challenges.
Mhm.
And if something ceases to be a challenge for me, then I need a new challenge.
Mhm.
One of the things that isn't a challenge, for example, for me at this point, and I recognize I'm a little unique in this way, but I think it's because I've been given a special dispensation because of the experiences I've had. I find forgiveness exceedingly easy.
Mhm.
I find myself unburdened of the responsibility of hating, disliking, or feeling resentment towards other people.
Mhm.
And that's because I've had incredible wrongs committed against my family, and you've alluded to them. I won't go deep into them,
Mhm.
but I think that there are other things, though, that I'm challenged with now, and that I will be challenged with in the future because I've kind of gotten over that hurdle. So I anticipate other things to help me,
Mhm.
um, overcome other hurdles, other things that probably I'm not even aware of, other failings that I have, in order to make me into a better person, so
Mhm.
that when I do exit this life, I'm prepared for what's next. I'm worthy of what's next in the sense of whatever blessing that I'm going to receive, that I'm able to receive it. I don't
Mhm.
I'm speaking in kind of very esoteric terms, but I'm hoping I'm understood.
No, yeah, I gotcha. No, again, appreciate you sharing that, and amen to all that. I mean, like one of the themes of the shift that, although if anybody's familiar with the story of Job, yes, it's about a lot of suffering, but it's also about forgiveness and redemption and
Mhm.
things about new beginnings. And it's kind of, not to oversimplify the Bible, but it's kind of the overarching idea is that like you have to have that forgiveness there. You have to have this idea of this isn't it. Like there is more to this life than just the superficial aspects of
Right.
pain and suffering and pleasures and like all these things that kind of come with the experience, but there is something more that's happening in the background that we don't have control over. But stories like the shift, stories like Job, they can illustrate what really is happening, with the human experience, which is we do suffer a lot. And what you
Right.
can do is infuse your forgiveness with that, and it makes it so much easier. But I thank you so much for sharing all that. It's really great. Final question for you
Mhm.
is, what do you have for advice for future filmmakers, and what are you working on next? This is hopefully supposed to be inspiring to filmmakers that want to make faith-based content, but they're not sure because they want to make something that's a little more mainstream and edgy, but
Mhm.
they're kind of like feeling lost. Tinseltown doesn't really welcome people of faith too much these days. But not that I mean, there are people out there that will help you out, making films that are faith-based content. But I think a lot of Christian filmmakers are kind of wondering, like, how do I, get into this? And what are you
Mhm.
working on? How did this all work? What are some words of
Right.
advice?
So, um, first of all, I want to push back a little bit that there are that Hollywood is that unwelcoming towards people of faith. I think
Mm-hmm.
certainly there are people who are,
Mm-hmm.
but I also have been surprised and delighted by how many people are working within Hollywood that are of faith. Not necessarily all of them that are very open about it, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's more there than people perceive.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, within the faith world, if you're trying to tell something trying to tell a story that's a little more explicitly dealing with God, which the shift can be categorized as that.
Mhm.
Um, to those people who are looking to get into that, the number one thing I would say is, um, it is not enough to feel that you have been called to do it. I get
Mm.
a lot of messages from people who say, I have been called to tell this story. I know I've been called. And then their emails are riddled with spelling errors and
Mhm.
a lack of understanding of how the industry works and bad syntax and all of these little red flags that tell me, oh, you're not ready at all. You're not ready
Mhm.
to jump into this space. You're not ready to jump into filmmaking. You have no idea what you're doing beyond this feeling that you've been called to do so. And maybe they have been. I have no idea. All I
Mhm.
know is they're not ready. And I talk to more people who feel this passion to tell stories in this space who are not ready than I do people who are ready to do so,
Mhm.
um, and who are equipped to do so. So I think what we need is we need a lot less people who are feeling called to do it, and a lot more people who are ready to do it.
Mhm.
Craft is what we need. We
Mhm.
have plenty of examples of faith-based films out there that are not up to par in
Mhm.
their craft. They're not well acted. They're not well shot. The
Mhm.
sound design is shoddy. You know, those are the types of things that we don't need those. And this is look, this is my personal opinion, right? This is
Right,
this
yeah,
is my
yeah.
perspective as a filmmaker.
Mhm.
But I would say work on your craft. Watch more than faith-based films. Watch the
Mhm.
great classics of Hollywood. Watch as
Mhm.
much as you can. Go out and experience life as well. You don't necessarily even have to go to film school. I didn't. There's
Mhm.
lots of ways to learn how to make films on YouTube, and and
Mhm.
and there's a million, DVDs and Blu-rays out there with great directors' commentaries and behind the scenes. Like, learn this stuff.
Mhm.
If you have a passion to share your faith, but not a passion to know film as an art form, then you might be better off preaching on a Sunday.
Mhm.
Film is not for you. I mean, that's really genuinely how I feel. You've got to love film making, and you've got to want to be better at that before you can even think about telling any kind of faith-based story through that.
Mhm.
And then as far as what I'm doing next, yeah, I mean, I want to take everything I've learned making the shift, and I want to make a film that's even better.
Nice.
Um, Talk about a film school. I mean, I haven't been to film school, but I sure feel like I have in the past year. It's a crazy way to learn how to make a movie,
Mhm.
to just make one and direct one and produce it and write it.
Mhm.
But I went into it obviously with an amount of knowledge, but I have so much more now, and I'm excited to dive back into the sci-fi space and to not
Mhm.
shy away from faith and to tell a story that is different, that is more
Mhm.
linear, that is a little bit more mainstream. That's
Mhm.
kind of the direction I'm heading in right now. I don't think that's forever the direction I'll head in with my career, but
Mhm.
I'm very conscious as I build my career and as I build the things that I'm doing. I'm very conscious of how can I make something else and 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 bring people who enjoyed the shift, bring people who want to see more from that filmmaker,
Mhm.
and then give them something new and different from
Mhm.
that will bring other people in to the party too,
Mhm.
who would be excited by a different type of film.
Yeah.
So that's my very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it was great. I loved every bit of it. I mean, the first segment about, telling filmmakers that it's not enough to just feel like you want to do it, or even if you genuinely feel like God's calling you to do it, well, God needs you to put in the work. Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to put in the time to actually go down and do it. I think it was Mark Duplass, the filmmaker. He has a great speech online where he tells new up and coming indie filmmakers the cavalry isn't coming. No one's going
Yeah.
to come and tell you that you're like, okay, we'll just make your movie for you now. And they may even look at examples like kind of what happened to you is that you made this short film, Angel Studios came calling and they just told you, yeah, go make them film. that's not what happened here. Like you had to go through the
No,
gauntlet
there was a
quite
lot
a
more to it
bit.
than that.
It was a lot more to it than that. And I think
Yeah.
people hang on or they misconceive or they have misconceptions about like what it takes to actually go through that. I'm still learning on my end. I mean, I've made one feature film, I've made a few short
Mhm.
films, done some commercials. I haven't gone through like what you've gone through on that level, but I know that it's something where it requires some stamina and a lot of attrition and a lot of knowledge and wisdom, things you
Yeah.
literally can't get unless you've actually gone through life a little bit. I like that you made
Mhm.
that point, which is that yeah, like life experience is actually a huge asset to have
Totally.
when it comes to being a filmmaker. You have to understand the complexities of life, and you're not going to always be like a Damien Chazelle where you make like a Whiplash and you're best director at the Oscars, when you're 25 or something.
Right,
It's like
right.
that's a lottery ticket mentality. It's probably not you, and not trying to be discouraging to people, but I think it is great that
Yeah.
we should tell people that there is options out there for you. You just need to be able to go do it. Like you have to find any way, scrape the barrel. Like again, you made
Mhm.
the Shift short film for like $500 and paid your friends
Yeah.
with like pizza or something like that. It's
Yep.
like it
Pretty
can be
much.
done. It can
Right.
be done. It's just you have to figure out a way to kind of mold it. And if it doesn't work out this time, do the next project and just keep going, keep failing
Mhm.
until you make it, type of thing. But
Yeah.
it's really great advice. I really, really enjoyed speaking with you here. I really hope
It's
to see
fun.
more and more of your stuff as it comes out. I'm really, really curious to see, kind of more what you have down the pipeline in the next project. But again, The Shift is available on streaming right now. I believe if I just
Mhm.
looked it up, it's available pretty much on any streaming platform, Amazon, and most any of the other big major streaming services. So you can go watch it there. Is it available at Angel Studios on their site as well?
Yeah, it is. It is. If you're a member of the guild, you can watch it for free. Eventually, it will be free to everyone on the
Mm.
Angel Studios app, but that's down the line.
All right. Yeah.
The other thing that I would anticipate in the next, I don't know how long, but the next several months, it'll eventually hit some kind of subscription service. So like
Mm-hmm.
like a Netflix or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or but right now I mean, look, it's not that expensive. Right now you can
It's like
rent it
three
for probably
bucks.
about $4
Yeah.
on the platform of your choice. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty accessible right now.
Got it. All right, great. Yeah, definitely go check it out. Look it up, The Shift. Brock, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope we get to speak again soon.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thanks so much, Dylan. This was a lot of fun.